The Grand Central Market was less a place of trade and more a secular temple dedicated to the exquisite excesses of the late 19th century. Its vaulted glass ceiling soared 40 feet above the stone floor, bathing the bustling scene below in a hazy, celestial light that seemed to filter out the grime of the city streets. Iron balconies, adorned with intricate floral patterns, circled the interior, offering spectators an Olympian view of the commerce beneath. The air, usually a chaotic blend of freshly cut flowers, roasted coffee beans, and the sharp scent of imported citrus, thrummed with the high-pitched energy of money-changing hands. It was this spectacle that drew the city's elite, and on the particular Tuesday in question, 3 such ladies moved through the aisles with an almost regal confidence. First, Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell, renowned for her precise taste in French lace and Jamaican spices. She carried herself with the untouchable hauteur of old wealth. Beside her was Miss Eleanor Vance, younger and more vibrant, keen on securing the freshest harvest of Californian apricots for her mother's preserves. Trailing slightly behind, but no less formidable, was Lady Beatrice Gresham, whose black silk dress and diamond brooch spoke volumes of her late husband's considerable estate. These 3 women represented the pinnacle of social standing, pillars of the community, respected and utterly predictable in their routines. Their presence at the market was an established Tuesday ritual, a brief, necessary foray into the common world before retreating to their grand homes. They paused briefly to admire a pyramid of perfect green apples, the gaslight glinting off the fruit's waxy skin, before turning their attention toward the far end of the hall. There, under the shadow of the brick upper level, lay the stall of Silas Thorne, where the familiar comforts of the market gave way to something far more curious and distinctly foreign. The ladies' eyes were now fixed on their ultimate destination, their purchases merely minutes away. The market thrummed, the light shone, and no one, not the coachman waiting outside, nor the clerks sweeping the floors, suspected that this routine would be the very last of their existence. Silas Thorne was an anomaly in the bustling, cheerful commerce of the Grand Central Market. While other vendors hawked their wares with theatrical flair and booming voices, Silas presided over his counter with the stillness of a statue carved from aged oak. His stall was positioned where the market's lighting was poorest, an island of shadow against the bright aisles. His goods were not the common apples and potatoes, but exotic imports that seemed to carry the weight of distant humid lands, jars of potent tinctures, dried leaves that coiled like sleeping vipers, and spices so rich in color they looked like pulverized gemstones. What truly set Silas apart was the scent that clung perpetually to his corner. Not the sharp musk of pepper or the sweetness of vanilla, but something deeper and more primordial. It was the heavy, almost intoxicating fragrance of freshly turned, deeply fertile earth. It was the smell of a newly dug grave, or a pristine, untouched forest floor after a spring rain. It was, many patrons agreed, unnerving, especially since the market was paved with stone. Silas himself was a man of minimal movement and even less speech. He possessed a thick, dark beard that obscured the lower half of his face, and his eyes, framed by perpetual shadows, observed the passing crowd with a detached, clinical intensity. When a customer spoke, he rarely offered more than a single, guttural affirmation or a quick, almost imperceptible nod. He did not engage in the pleasantries of the spectacle. His transaction with the customer was swift, efficient, and chillingly impersonal, focused entirely on the exchange of money for product. It was this very silence and lack of distraction that Mrs. Caldwell, Miss Vance, and Lady Gresham sought out. In a world of overblown gossip and social clamor, Silas's stall offered a brief respite, a moment of profound quietude where their purchases could be made without the draining requirement of polite conversation. They approached his counter now, their elegant silhouettes momentarily obscuring the barrels of dried berries and the opaque glass jars. They were ready for their transaction. Silas was ready for his. The earthy scent seemed to deepen, heavy and sweet, as the 3 women came to a silent, fatal stop before the silent vendor. The transaction was executed with the chilling precision that defined Silas Thorne. Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell, ever the efficient buyer, stepped up first. She requested a pound of crushed saffron threads and a vial of the potent, dark resin Silas called Kashmiri Night Bloom. She offered her hand-stitched leather purse. Silas's large, calloused hand took the money, his fingers briefly brushing hers, a contact that sent an odd, cold sensation through her arm. He placed the heavy jar of resin and the small sack of saffron onto the counter. Evelyn took her purchase, nodded crisply, and without a backward glance, stepped away. Miss Eleanor Vance was next, requesting a mixture of rare peppercorns and a basket of what Silas vaguely referred to as sun-dried forest fruits. The fruits were dark, shriveled spheres that looked suspiciously like dried berries but smelled richly of damp soil and iron. As she leaned in to inspect them, her wide-brimmed hat cast a deep shadow over Silas's counter. Silas scooped the berries into a small wooden bowl and presented them. Eleanor paid, lifted the bowl, and turned, following the path Evelyn had just taken. Lady Beatrice Gresham was the last. She asked simply for a large, unmarked, opaque jar from beneath the counter, a vessel she purchased weekly, containing a substance whose nature she never disclosed. Silas reached down, his arm disappearing entirely into the shadows beneath the wood, and produced the heavy, stone-gray jar. As Lady Gresham took the jar, her silk-gloved fingers seemed to tremble momentarily under its weight. She settled her account, and then, like the two women before her, she turned sharply away from the counter and stepped into the aisle. The entire exchange took less than 90 seconds. To the men lingering nearby and the vendor across the way, the three women had simply completed their shopping and moved deeper into the market's expansive interior. But a minute passed, then two. The women did not reappear. They were not seen rounding the corner toward the meat stalls, nor did their distinctive silhouettes pass near the tall, sunlit arches. They had walked away from Silas Thorne's counter, their hands full of exotic goods, and then, in the space of a single silent breath, ceased to be. The silence at Silas's stall, usually just a quietude, suddenly felt heavy and absolute. The first stirrings of unease began not within the market's echoing halls, but outside, amidst the cobblestones where the wealthy waited. Bartholomew, Lady Gresham's stout coachman, first checked his silver pocket-watch, then nervously paced the length of his team. It was well past the customary time for her ladyship's departure. Similarly, the coachmen for Mrs. Caldwell and Miss Vance were exchanging puzzled glances. Their mistresses, renowned for their punctuality, were late. 5 minutes became 10, then 15. At first, the delay was dismissed as a matter of aristocratic deliberation, perhaps a sudden interest in an imported bolt of French silk. But as the half-hour mark approached, a cold dread began to settle on the liveried men. Bartholomew finally tied his reins and entered the market, his boots echoing loudly on the stone. He walked directly to Silas Thorne's stall, knowing it was the last point of their usual route. "Excuse me, Master Thorne," Bartholomew said, his voice unusually strained. "Her ladyship and the other ladies, did they say where they were headed next?" Silas paused in the act of polishing an amber-colored jar. He looked up, his expression unreadable, and merely shook his head once. "They paid. They departed." Bartholomew retraced his steps, his anxiety mounting. He checked the prominent booths, the baker, the florist, the butcher. None had seen the trio since they were near the spice merchants section. Within the hour, the worried coachman had alerted the market superintendent, Mr. Hemlock. The market's routine was suddenly, violently interrupted. Hemlock, a man whose life was dedicated to orderly commerce, initiated a frantic, yet discreet, search. Every closet, every storage room, every public convenience was checked. The women's hats were too distinct, their dresses too expensive to simply blend in. They should have been seen. Yet, despite the market's high ceiling and open plan, despite the hundreds of eyes present, the three wealthy customers had melted into the dense crowd, only to emerge nowhere. Their absence became a physical weight, a suffocating silence where the rustle of silk and the laughter of society women should have been. The only things left were the 3 empty carriages waiting patiently outside, a chilling testament to the fact that wherever the women had gone, they had not intended to go far. The case, now designated a matter of grave civic concern, was handed to Inspector Alastair Finch of the city precinct. Finch was a man built like a sturdy iron safe, known for his methodical mind and his absolute refusal to believe in miracles or spontaneous human combustion. When he arrived at the Grand Central Market, the scene was secured, the usual commerce replaced by a fearful, hushed stasis. Finch went straight to Silas Thorne's stall. He dismissed the theories of trapdoors and hidden tunnels as the ravings of panicked merchants. A thorough search of the area by his men yielded nothing. No scrap of silk, no stray diamond, no dropped purse. But Finch, operating on the cold logic that something physical must have happened, knelt before the counter. He ignored Silas, who stood silently observing the investigation with unnerving calm, and focused on the stone floor. The market floor was notoriously uneven, coated in a fine, grayish layer of dust carried in by countless shoes. But near the front of Silas's counter, where the three women had stood, Finch discovered the only deviation from the pervasive grit. 3 distinct, clean circular impressions. They weren't footprints. They were too large and perfectly round, pressed down through the dust right into the stone, as if a great, heavy, circular object had been briefly set down and then lifted. They were positioned exactly where the 3 women's bodies would have been aligned during their final purchase. What was placed here, Thorne? Finch asked, not looking up. Silas, for the first time, seemed to pause before answering. Nothing, Inspector. Merely the common shifting of baskets. Finch ran a gloved finger over the rim of the closest impression. The dust was not just pushed aside, it was compacted, suggesting tremendous weight. More disturbingly, the residual grit inside the circles was not the gray market dust, but a fine, dark, almost black material. He rubbed it between his fingers. It was the same overwhelming, metallic, fertile soil scent that clung to Silas's entire stall, a scent now intensified by the disturbance. The women hadn't left under their own power. Something massive and circular had been placed precisely where they stood, and when it was removed, so were they. Finch stood up, fixing his steady gaze on the silent vendor. The common dust had betrayed the uncommon truth. Inspector Finch moved the interrogation from the bustling market floor to the chilly, small office of the market superintendent, Mr. Hemlock. Silas Thorne sat across the desk, completely at ease, his large hands resting on his knees. The faint, earthy odor of his stall seemed to have permeated his heavy wool coat, filling the small room with a scent that felt profoundly out of place amidst the paperwork and brass fittings. Finch opened a ledger and began, his tone slow and deliberate. Mr. Thorne, 3 prominent members of this city vanished mere feet from your counter. You were the last person to speak to them. We need a full account of that transaction. Silas spoke, his voice a low, gravelly monotone that rarely rose above a whisper. They ordered. I filled their orders. They paid. They left. What more is there to tell? What did they purchase? Finch pressed. Silas listed the items with flawless recall: a pound of saffron and night bloom resin for Mrs. Caldwell, peppercorns and sun-dried forest fruits for Miss Vance, an unmarked jar from below the counter for Lady Gresham. His memory was perfect, his facts irrefutable. Finch leaned forward, placing a photograph of the 3 circular impressions on the desk. These marks were found precisely where the women stood. They indicate that something heavy was placed there, momentarily, and then removed. What was it? Silas did not flinch. He glanced at the photo without interest. As I stated, Inspector, baskets and crates are moved constantly. They are heavy. Perhaps a delivery was being received. It is a market, after all. And the soil, Mr. Thorne? The dark, rich soil we found compacted in those marks? You sell spices and tinctures, not topsoil. A barely perceptible smirk touched Silas's lips, quickly vanishing. My goods are grown on distant shores, Inspector. They travel in thick packing. That packing contains soil. It is inevitable some dust should settle. Is a merchant to be held accountable for the dust on his floor? His answers were infuriatingly calm, logical, and structured. Silas Thorne was not rattled, did not contradict himself, and offered a plausible, if deeply unsatisfying, explanation for every piece of evidence. He was simply a quiet man running his business, entirely innocent of the monstrous implication hanging in the air. Yet, beneath the calm surface, Finch felt a profound certainty. The man was lying, and the secret was rooted deep, perhaps literally, in the earth. The interrogation ended with a polite but firm release. Finch had learned nothing, save that Silas Thorne possessed an alarming degree of self-control. The panic that gripped the city's social elite was as potent as any of Silas Thorne's tinctures. The vanished trio, Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell, Miss Eleanor Vance, and Lady Beatrice Gresham, were not merely shoppers, they were key components of the city's intricate social machinery. Their disappearance was a rupture in the expected order of things, suggesting that wealth and status offered no protection against the unknown. Dinners were cancelled, balls postponed, and every wealthy woman felt a chilling suspicion creep in. If they could simply vanish, who was safe? Among the husbands, the distress was raw and multifaceted. Mr. Philemon Caldwell, Evelyn's spouse, was not a man accustomed to powerlessness. He controlled shipping lanes and vast financial holdings, but now, he could not control the location of his own wife. He sat in his cavernous library, the mahogany paneling seeming to mock his helplessness, clutching the latest dispatch from Inspector Finch, a document that contained more questions than answers. Caldwell wasn't crying, he was coldly furious. His wife's absence wasn't just a personal loss, it was a profound embarrassment and a massive disruption. He had already offered a reward, an amount that could buy most of the market outright, but no credible witness had come forward. He paced, stopping only to stare at the last photograph taken of Evelyn, an image that now felt impossibly distant. He sought out Inspector Finch later that evening, bypassing the usual channels with a blunt, desperate force. "Inspector," he demanded, his voice tight with barely contained rage, "I need to know what you are not telling me about this spice vendor. That man, Thorne, deals in the fringe, the exotic. My wife would not simply leave, not with that new Italian silk she was so excited to wear next week. Find her, Finch. Use any means. If you cannot find a body, then I want that man's entire stall, and the ground beneath it, turned inside out. I will fund it. Just tell me what strange thing he sells that is worth a wealthy woman's life." Caldwell's fear was not the simple grief of a widower, but the complex, bitter terror of a powerful man who realizes that a force he cannot command has entered his ordered world. He was now a desperate investor, willing to spend his fortune to solve a mystery rooted in the silent, fertile earth of the Grand Central Market. Following the police presence and the desperate inquiries of Mr. Caldwell, the atmosphere in the Grand Central Market curdled from lively commerce into suffocating paranoia. The news of the three ladies' vanishing act, initially a private matter for the elite, became the morbid fascination of the common market-goer. The market, once a place of trusted goods, became a labyrinth of nervous whispers. Vendors who had cheerfully ignored Silas Thorne's oddity for years now used his name as a hushed curse. The old rumors, stories about his unnaturally quick harvests, about the opaque glass jars he never opened, about his goods tasting too vibrant, resurfaced with frightening intensity. Old Mrs. O'Malley, who sold cheese a few stalls down, recounted a tale to anyone who would listen. "He has a darkness about him, that Silas. I once saw him receive a delivery, not on the main floor, mind you, but through a small hatch in the back alley. The delivery man looked ill, pale as milk, and the package. It was heavy, dripping water, and smelled exactly like a freshly turned cemetery plot." The accusations quickly moved beyond the exotic nature of his spices to something far more sinister. People muttered about the root man, a folk demon from ancient city lore said to trade life for fertility, offering unnatural abundance in exchange for human essence. Silas, with his silent demeanor and the clinging scent of rich, dark earth, fit the terrifying profile perfectly. The market owners were facing financial ruin. Patrons avoided the entire west end of the hall, circling wide around Silas's stall as if it were a visible source of plague. Even Inspector Finch's methodical approach was viewed with skepticism. The people wanted a monster caught, not a ledger balanced. The general consensus was simple and chilling. Silas Thorne had used his forbidden wares and his unnatural silence to somehow consume the three women, folding them into his terrifying and secret trade. The fear was thick and palpable, forcing Finch's hand. He knew he could no longer rely solely on official procedures. The growing mob mentality demanded immediate, visible action. Inspector Finch was a man who trusted numbers far more than gossip. Dismissing the market's tales of the root man, He focused his energy on the one thing Silas Thorne could not silence: his ledger. Finch had impounded Silas's official import and sales books, which detailed every exotic shipment, every purchase, and every ounce of spice sold. He spent 2 full days buried in the cramped script, comparing sales records with remaining stock. The anomaly was subtle, requiring a meticulous eye to spot. It related to 3 specific high-value and utterly mysterious items that Silas did not bother to name beyond a simple classification: Terra nigra extract, vines of deep bloom, and unrefined earth salt. These were the types of peculiar goods that only Lady Gresham and Mrs. Caldwell would seek out. Finch found that while sales of common items had been steady, the inventory for these 3 specific exotic items had increased over the last week. The record showed that Silas had sold a total of 2 pounds of the vines of deep bloom, one of which was sold to Miss Vance moments before she vanished. Yet his remaining stock was higher than it should have been. The total surplus across the 3 items was approximately 10 pounds. This defied all logic. A merchant facing a sudden involuntary stoppage of trade, due to a murder investigation, no less, should see his inventory remain static, or perhaps decrease slightly due to minor unreported sales. It should never increase. There were no corresponding entries for new deliveries, no invoices for incoming goods to account for the surplus. The ledgers were otherwise impeccable, making this sudden illogical gain stand out like a severed finger. Finch tapped the figures with his pen, a cold certainty hardening in his gut. This wasn't theft, nor was it a simple accounting error. It suggested a terrifying possibility, that the stock was not sourced through conventional means. It hinted that Silas's supply chain lay not on a distant ship, but close at hand. The vendor hadn't simply sold his wares. He had somehow cultivated them in situ, harvesting a new supply almost immediately after the disappearance of the 3 customers. And the amount of new stock was equal, in a disturbingly abstract way, to the weight and volume of 3 human beings. The inventory hadn't just shifted, it had been horrifically replenished. Armed with the damning evidence of the unnatural inventory increase, Inspector Finch knew he couldn't wait for a formal warrant. The social and financial pressure from men like Mr. Caldwell was immense, and the vendor's strange calm was unnerving. He organized a small, discreet team and waited until well after midnight, when the Grand Central Market was a dark, echoing tomb, its high arches looming in the moonlight. Finch led his men directly to Silas Thorne's stall. The scent of dark earth, normally muted by the day's commerce, was overpowering in the enclosed space, thick and almost fungal. Using lanterns, they focused their attention on the sturdy brick wall directly behind the vendor's counter, a wall that formed the back boundary of his section. The brickwork was old, solid, and utterly featureless. However, Finch's methodical eye caught a subtle difference in the mortar. At a height corresponding to the back of Silas's shelves, there was a faint, straight seam running vertically and horizontally, much cleaner than the century-old cement surrounding it. It was the mark of a recently disturbed and meticulously resealed structure. "Scrape it," Finch ordered quietly, pointing to the line of pristine mortar. Using a thin, specialized tool, one of the constables carefully picked at the line. It gave way with surprising ease. They hadn't used cement. They had used a thick, mud-like compound that dried hard but was carefully disguised with brick dust. Working swiftly, they pulled the central section of brickwork out in one large, pre-cut block. The removal revealed not a storeroom, but a heavy, wooden door, thick, reinforced with iron straps, and almost perfectly camouflaged. It was secured by a single, formidable bolt. As the men struggled to shift the door, a low, moist air, significantly warmer than the market air, wafted out, bringing with it a deep, sweet, and disturbing perfume. It was the scent of the fertile soil, amplified tenfold, mixed now with a strange, sickly floral note that was entirely new. Finch pushed the door fully open, shining his lantern into the black space. A narrow set of rough-hewn wooden stairs descended into the darkness, slick with condensation, leading down into the unknown earth beneath the Grand Central Market. The secret of Silas Thorne, and the location of his ever-increasing, exotic inventory, was finally within their grasp. Before descending into the newly discovered subterranean space, Inspector Finch needed to understand what history, if any, preceded Silas Thorne's strange tenancy. He spent the remainder of the night in the musty, dust-choked municipal archives, poring over the construction and leasing records for the Grand Central Market, dating back nearly 50 years. The building itself had a perfectly ordinary, if grand, history. But the specific section occupied by Silas Thorne's stall, the west end of the main hall, had a peculiar number of minor, almost laughable entries. Finch found several archived reports from the 1850s and 60s detailing unfounded concerns raised by early tenants. One document, a complaint from an elderly cheesemonger in 1863, was particularly telling. It spoke of a pernicious, overwhelming dampness that seemed to emanate from the very stone floor near his stall, which was later found to be exactly where Silas's counter now stood. The cheesemonger claimed the dampness caused his aged cheeses to spoil unnaturally fast, and his most robust stock to simply dissolve into a dark, viscous slime. His complaint ended with a chilling note. He had dismissed 3 delivery boys over a period of 2 years, all of whom vanished shortly after being sent to the western storage area. The cases were officially closed as desertions or runaways. Another document detailed a series of unexpected structural surveys in the 1870s, initiated by the market's original architect. The reports noted an unnatural settling and shifting of the foundation beneath that specific section, suggesting the ground below was far softer and more unstable than anywhere else in the massive structure. The architect attributed it to poor initial drainage, but Finch saw a pattern, a location with a history of unsettling dampness, minor disappearances dismissed by officials, and foundation issues indicating a persistently active earth beneath the floor. The accumulated history painted a terrifying picture. Silas Thorne had not simply chosen a location to conduct his gruesome business, he had inherited a spot with a long-dormant, sinister characteristic. He was exploiting a vulnerability in the building's very foundation, a place where the earth itself had always been strangely hungry, making the disappearances of Mrs. Caldwell, Miss Vance, and Lady Gresham merely the latest, most high-profile offerings in a long, forgotten history of the Grand Central Market's shadow. Before organizing the descent, Inspector Finch sent a small sample of the dark, rich grit he'd scraped from the 3 circular floor impressions to the city's foremost chemical analyst, Dr. Elias Vane. Dr. Vane was a meticulous, humorless man whose laboratory smelled strongly of sulfur and sterile glass. Finch received Vane's preliminary report the following morning. The findings were, scientifically speaking, terrifying. Dr. Vane had confirmed that the sample was indeed a remarkably high-quality soil, far superior to any natural earth found in the city limits. It was rich in minerals and retained moisture with an almost unnatural tenacity. However, the analysis revealed 2 primary anomalies. First, the soil contained an extraordinarily high concentration of calcium, phosphorus, and nitrogen, the key components of rapidly decaying organic material, far exceeding the levels found in even the best agricultural soil. Dr. Vane noted, this soil has recently been enriched, not with common manure, but with the specific, dense concentration of nutrients found in mammalian bone and tissue. It suggested an aggressive, hyper-accelerated decomposition process. Second, the soil sample contained traces of a unique and complex organic compound that Dr. Vane could not identify. It was a potent alkaloid that seemed to serve as a growth catalyst, fueling the soil's activity. The chemical structure of this compound was unlike any known flora or fauna, yet it possessed a disturbing narcotic quality, reminiscent of certain powerful night-blooming hallucinogens. Vane hypothesized that this compound was the source of the heavy, sweet, floral scent Finch had noticed wafting from behind the hidden door. The report concluded with a chilling summary. The soil was not merely fertile, but actively cannibalistic. It was engineered, or perhaps evolved, to consume and rapidly convert complex organic life into dense, plant-sustaining nutrients. The scientific facts confirmed the market's darkest whispers. Silas Thorne was not just a vendor, he was a gardener tending a dreadful, subterranean plot. And the 3 missing women, their bodies, their very substance, had likely been reduced to the very chemical compounds that now enriched the soil used to grow the exotic, unnamed wares sold openly at the Grand Central Market. Finch and his team descended the makeshift stairs revealed behind the hidden door. The air immediately became thick, humid, and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. The temperature was unnaturally high, and the sickly sweet, floral earth scent was overwhelming, tasting metallic on the tongue. The lantern light cut through the gloom, revealing a space that was not a cellar or a basement, but a massive, purpose-built subterranean greenhouse. The chamber was lined entirely in black, porous rock, and a complex system of brass pipes delivered water to the center. There, under the oppressive heat, was a vast, circular pit filled with the dark, rich soil identified by Dr. Vane, the cannibalistic earth. Growing in this soil was the inventory from Silas's stall, but in a horrific, living state. The vines of deep bloom were not dried husks but fat, fleshy creepers that pulsed with slow, lifelike movements. Their blossoms were a deep, unsettling purple, and they clung to wooden frames that resembled primitive human effigies. The terra nigra extract came from large, bulbous fungi that seemed to absorb the ambient light, growing with frightening speed. And at the very center of the pit, 3 distinct areas of the soil were freshly turned, heavily mounded, and actively growing. Here, the strange flora was denser, darker, and pushing up with feverish speed. Resting beside each mound was a heavy, circular, stone planter, the very size and shape of the impressions Finch found on the market floor. The method of the disappearance was now sickeningly clear. Silas had dropped the heavy planters over the women, trapping them instantly, before transferring them into the pit. The weight of the planter would have been enough to silence any struggle. Silas Thorne was not merely a merchant, he was a meticulous, monstrous agronomist. He had created an environment that required only 2 things for his exotic, valuable plants to thrive: unnatural heat and concentrated, rapidly available human essence. The 3 wealthy ladies, chosen for their good health and physical substance, had not simply vanished. They had been brutally, biologically converted into Silas's perpetually increasing supply of forbidden spice. The strange compounds in the soil were accelerating the process, turning bone and tissue into fertilizer in days, not decades. Finch lifted his lantern, his face pale with horror. The market above sold sustenance, the pit below consumed life to create a poisonous parody of it. The horrific sight of the subterranean greenhouse solidified Inspector Finch's resolve. He left his constables to document the gruesome findings and ascended the slick, earthen stairs alone. He found Silas Thorne exactly where he expected, back at his stall, calmly wiping down his counter with a dark, oily rag, the perfect picture of an innocent merchant preparing for the next day's trade. "The air is thick down there, Thorne," Finch stated, his voice devoid of emotion, the calmness a far greater threat than any shout. "Heavy with the perfume of your harvest. It's a smell I now know to be the scent of accelerated death." Silas finished his wipe and placed the rag neatly beneath the counter. He looked at Finch, his eyes finally showing a flicker of something. Not fear, but a cold, proprietary pride. "Every man finds a way to master the earth, Inspector. My way is merely more efficient than most." Finch stepped closer, placing his hand flat on the counter above the hidden jar Lady Gresham had purchased. "The women are gone. Consumed. Reduced to chemical feed for your unrefined earth salt and your vines of deep bloom. Tell me how you chose them." Silas finally broke his silence with a low, rumbling torrent of words. "They were the best specimens. Healthy, well-fed, full of life. They represented the highest concentration of the very nutrients my precious plants demand. Their routine made them predictable. Their wealth made them untraceable. Society assumes their kind simply leaves, not that they are taken." He gestured around his pristine stall. "I offered a better, more complete transition, Inspector. They paid for a final purchase, and then I gave them to the most fertile ground in this city. A single heavy stone, a slight disturbance in the dust, and now they contribute to something truly marvelous. Look at my stock, Inspector. It is vibrant, unique. It is the purest form of trade, life for abundance." Finch pulled his revolver, aiming it directly at the center of Silas's chest. "It is murder, Thorne. A grotesque, cold-blooded massacre." Silas merely smiled, a terrifying sight in his thick, dark beard. "Is it, Inspector? They are not entirely gone. They are here, in every jar, in every spice. They are the flavor of my success." He took a defiant, slow step toward the hidden door. "You have only found the garden, Inspector. You have yet to understand the full secret of the market." The confrontation ended abruptly. Silas, surprisingly strong and fast, lunged past Finch, not toward the open door, but toward a heavy barrel of dried dates. He tipped it over, plunging the entire area into momentary chaos as the sticky fruit scattered. Finch fired, the sound deafening in the vaulted hall, but Silas had vanished into the shadows of the western stalls, leaving behind only the overwhelming, sweet scent of the forbidden harvest and the horrifying truth of his terrible trade. Silas Thorne was never seen again. Despite a massive city-wide hunt and Philemon Caldwell's immense reward, the vendor vanished into the crowded obscurity of the city's underbelly, leaving behind only the chilling evidence of his crime. Inspector Finch, however, had secured his victory in the dark. The discovery of the subterranean greenhouse was deemed too horrific for public consumption. Instead of revealing the full, unspeakable truth, that 3 society ladies had been biologically converted into exotic spices, the official report to the mayor's office was carefully sanitized. It stated that Silas Thorne was a member of a dangerous, unnamed, botanical cult that used rare, powerful toxins derived from tropical plants to dispose of their victims, whose bodies were then dissolved in a strong, fast-acting acid in the hidden pit. The 3 women were confirmed deceased, victims of a maniacal murderer. The fate of the Grand Central Market was sealed immediately. The West Wing was closed, draped in black canvas, and declared structurally unsound due to the unnaturally high moisture content in the foundation. The vast, vaulted structure, once a symbol of the city's opulence, was officially condemned. Workers spent months quietly filling the monstrous, subterranean greenhouse with tons of concrete and quicklime, sealing the earth's dreadful hunger beneath a sterile, permanent tomb. The fear, however, could not be so easily contained. The market's closure and the subsequent whispers confirmed the populace's darkest suspicions. The common people knew it wasn't just acid, it was the earth itself, Thorne's dark magic, that had consumed the wealthy. Every spice, every dried berry, and every mysterious tincture sold in the city now carried a taint. The city tried to forget the incident, but the silence remained. Even years later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, if you walked past the derelict, curtained-off ruins of the Grand Central Market, a few old-timers swore they could still catch a faint, subtle whiff on the wind, not of decay, but of that strange, heavy, sweet floral perfume, a grim reminder of the rich, forbidden harvest that had bloomed briefly in the heart of the city, nourished by the lives of the unsuspecting. The price of exotic spice had never been higher, and the secret of the Grand Central Market's dark, hungry earth was forever cemented.